Thank you very much for the opportunity to come back to Western Australia. And can I say, in acknowledging the Indigenous owners of the land on which we're meeting today, it's been very encouraging during the Yes debate to see the references to Western Australia when it comes to fundamental agreements, that the Noongar settlement has been given quite some publicity, because normally speaking, what comes out of Western Australia is subject to a fair bit of legitimate, at times, very, very powerful criticism. So congratulations to the Aboriginal people who were behind that move, the time that it took for them to negotiate with the government, and then the bipartisan approach to settle the final deal. I'm very proud to be speaking to social scientists here today. I just need to tell you a little story that was very, very important in my academic and personal life. And that was in year 10, at the end of year 10 at the Geraldton High School, as it was then, where I attended, the school counsellor came up from Perth, and we did all these tests and all that sort of thing. And the school counsellor then interviewed, students and said what we'd revealed through answering questions. And she turned to me and she said, "You don't like doing physics very much, do you?" And I said, "No." She said, "No." She said, "You should study history, economics, geography. That's your thing." And sure enough, I changed my program of study, and my marks went up like this. And ever since, I've been speaking out on behalf of the social sciences and the humanities ever since. So I do thank that school counsellor. And I finished the story by saying I did actually tell this story once on national radio with Margaret Throsby. She used to do that wonderful program where you could select some music. And Marjorie, who was the school counsellor, heard it. And she was obviously very delighted to hear that. And I think it tells us a number of things. One, the importance of our education system in assisting students as they move through their careers as students and then move on to higher education or perhaps work. I think it's very important that we support those school counsellors. And I'm pleased to say that the agreement between the Government of New South Wales and the Teachers Federation, which should be signed off and completed by the end of this week, has a significant increase in the salaries there for school counsellors. So I'm pleased to say that was agreed. Now, what a period for social science. I mean, Gary's already indicated, I think, that there are so many issues at the moment. There are 5 really big ones that I think will require some in-depth analysis by our social science community, sharing ideas, testing out the evidence, etc. I mean, the first one is about politics in general. There's a lack of trust in the system. What does that mean? What does it mean to say there's a lack of trust? What are the institutional implications of it? Is it being read properly by the politicians, or are they just going through the motions and the trust factor's not being addressed properly? And I'm involved with the New Democracy Foundation, which supports the use of citizens' assemblies to try and get more, I think, meaningful public involvement in policy making. And I was privileged to be in Ireland just recently, and I visited the session of the Citizens' Assembly they have there on drug policy, where the randomly selected Irish men and women were asking the experts questions about it. So I think the whole question of politics and its nature today, and what we need to do to really bring some a change. Climate, of course, is a huge one. Whenever I think of the climate issue, I think of salinity here in Western Australia, where way back in the 1920s, the research that was being done showed very clearly that land clearing was letting the water table come up, and you'll finish up with salinity. The governments of the day ignored it. They wanted the quick buck out of the agricultural industry, and we see the consequences in part of the wheat belt. So let's hope that the climate issue can be addressed in a meaningful and scientific way, and in this sense, in relation to the physical sciences. But that issue reminds us the physical sciences and the social sciences can work together and need to work together, because, as Albert Einstein said, politics is more important than physics. It's a very complex business, And if you want to tackle climate, we're going to have a sophisticated approach to our politics. There's the whole question of security and safety, particularly in relation to our suburbs and domestic violence, that really needs some in-depth analysis so that public policy can come out in an effective way. Growing inequality. I think the penny's dropped that if you continue to allow inequality to grow, this has significant implications for all areas of public policy and all areas of human welfare. And the wonderful book by Wilkinson on inequality and the connection that he's found in his studies between inequality and a whole lot of negative indicators of human well-being. And finally, of course, there's the productivity agenda, which is tended to be monopolised by market economists, but I think if we take a more broadly based view of it and a more digging deeper approach to dealing with it, we could, I think, get some solutions there. But at the moment, it's sort of dominated by a market approach, whereas I must say, when I look at what's happened in New South Wales in education, the teacher's salary issue, and a classic industrial issue, is so important to the issue of national productivity and national well-being. And at the moment, clearly, we don't have a broadly based view of productivity. So lots out there, and I urge all of you as social scientists to keep waving the flag in terms of the solutions that we need to find for all of those issues. We need some new thinking. Clearly, when you look at the productivity question, which I just mentioned, there's a very narrow debate going on there, and I think let's hope that the new commissioner that's come in can widen it out. Now, my own career, I've been very, very lucky person. I think of that great book, A Fortunate Life by Facey. 50% of my post-schooling career has been in academia, and 50% has been in active politics, electoral politics and parliamentary politics. Of course, there are different other forms of politics, but that was mine. These are different modes of thinking, and it was a very, very useful thing for me to have the academic exposure over many, many years before I went into Parliament, and I certainly think it brings a frame of thinking that's very, very useful when it comes to politics, but also very important when it comes to politics. I mean, the academic approach is to dig deep, to speak the truth about what the evidence tells you, and sometimes that can be difficult for governments to digest. But it is very important that we have serious academic research in the social sciences to inform governments about what needs to be done if they're going to be serious about issues like long-term poverty, etc. But investigate, explore, seek wisdom. All of the philosophy that we expect of our university systems and higher education systems is so important for the welfare of our society. As we look at Russia today, for example, when the communist system eventually collapsed under the pressure of corruption and all sorts of factors, they turned to free market economics. And I was very fortunate to be visiting Kazakhstan with my wife, who's a public health professional and our translator. I said, "What's life been like in Russia? In your life?" She said, "Oh, it was terrible under Stalin. My father said something at a meeting once and he got hauled out to Kazakhstan where they had a lot of the camps. And then she said there was a little brief period under Khrushchev where it started, there was a little bit of truth-telling going on, and it was just a little bit better. But he said then when the oligarchs came in, the power being given to them by the structural system that was created, and of course the sidelining of Gorbachev, this has led to the creation of this new class of oligarchs who, as you know, are not exactly fond of the public interest in all of the things they do. So it's very important that we get a good response from our social science community as to what's needed to be done with the many issues that we face. Then, of course, there becomes that other side of my career, which is the advocacy side, and trying to make sense of ideas in the context of all sorts of factors and issues that come to bear on policy making. And I'd like to think that a good policymaker at local, state or federal level in Australia, a good policymaker should try to bring together the scientific side of things, if you like, to put it that way, and the activist political side of things on the other hand. And I certainly thought very much about that, particularly when in opposition and looking for a frame of government when we came to power. And my solution to that was the sustainability principle. And you may know that a lot of the work that was done for my sustainability strategy was done in our universities, among students as well as teachers in our university system. And I utilised my time and friendships with people at the Murdoch University to help create our sustainability strategy. A really good example where social scientists and governments can work together and find a solution to problems. Sadly though, with all politics, to sustain a big strategy like sustainability, it needed driving from the top, and not all of the people involved in politics think it's all that good an idea. So it's a challenge to keep social science alive and sustain it over a long-term period, because when you do, you can see the benefits that come through. Just look at some urban developments that perhaps were put in place 20 or 30 years ago, and some of them that have been put in place since. You know, there's been a tremendous upsurge in thinking about urban policy that's improved well-being of many of our newer suburbs. So I've been a backbencher, I've been on parliamentary committees, I've been on government task force. The one I'm most proud of is safety for seniors, and I had a young student from, I think it was UWA Phys Ed department, who'd read that in Sweden, of course it have to be in Sweden, they did an analysis of how fast old people walk. Because what you find is when old people cross the road, they usually only in their mind are capable of getting halfway, but they think they're going the whole way, and this can be quite seriously dangerous for them, which is why you have the rails in the middle of the road. But also, I went to Swan Cottage Homes and did a study of the walking speeds of the elderly in Western Australia. They walk faster than their Swedish compatriots. I think the reason for this was that a lot of people that retired to Swan Cottage Homes were formerly from the farming community, and I think they were pretty fit, you know, the way they went about it. But we could adjust the times of the red light so that they had time to go the full length and not just the half length. So social science can do all sorts of things. And that was a little report that I did, but I still rate it as one of the most interesting things I did in politics. Now, I want to just leave my comments today to give you a little insight in what goes on in a cabinet and how as social scientists we might think about that. Cabinet's a fascinating place, particularly when I had the privilege in my second period in government to be the Premier, so I chaired the meeting. I always remember one thing about that straight away. On my right was the Deputy Leader and Treasurer, who was very much focused on economics, and he had a very, very sophisticated view of the economy, economic rationalism. On my left was a farmer who was the head of the upper house, the Labor chief in the upper house, who was without any question what you would call an agrarian socialist, and never really had changed his mind. Wonderful people, and so immediately there's a dialogue, and you have to have a dialogue in a cabinet. And the dialogue, of course, you'd like to see it being led by evidence, but it isn't always led by evidence, but you'd like to think that would be the case. So who's in there? I'm sitting there, I'm the Premier. I've got the agrarian socialist on the left, and I've got the economic rationalist on the right, but then they're all the ministers bringing their particular proposals to the cabinet. I think the overarching frame of thinking is a spectrum, and on one side of the spectrum we have what we might call fundamentalists, who have one big idea, and really they're not very keen on compromising at all, because they've got a big idea, and whatever you say to them about the evidence, they'll find some way of thinking and some way of saying, well, that's not appropriate because this is God's law. It might be a religious argument, it might be an ideological argument. But whatever it is, there's no compromise, and people stand on the values that they hold very, very dearly. On the other side are the opportunists. So the spectrum from and the opportunists, they're not many, but they're there, who just simply will do what it takes to stay in power, whatever that is. So they're not constrained as the fundamentalists are, and they really, it's sad to see some of the opportunism that goes on, but sometimes, of course, in the real world of politics, and I'll come back to that, those compromises are necessary to move the ship forward. I think it was, I don't know who it was, once said that sometimes you have to take one step back in order to take two steps forward. I think it might have been Lennon. I think it was So that's true. But also sitting in that cabinet are short-term people and long-term people. Short-termers aren't interested in the long term. They just want to get re-elected, or they want to focus on what people are thinking now, whereas sustainability, of course, requires you to go on to a more long-term approach. Then you've got the people who are driven by interests, and they might be very narrow interests. It might be lining up on an issue, not necessarily because they think the economics and politics and evidence is on the side of that policy, but because it helps them in relation to some within the power system that is any political party today. So then you've got your poll-driven people who want to know when a policy comes up, what's the polling? What's the polling? So you're sitting there and you've got all these things going on, and I guess what I would like to think that a good cabinet does is try to bring it together, even though they're going to be compromises, and even though realism and idealism are going to sit together, and not always happily, but nevertheless, your story is allowing you to take the whole thing forward. Now, this is where I think social science comes in. If you have a cabinet that is dominated by a cabinet which is dominated by, say, opportunists or short-termists or people who are just interested in polls or whatever, and there's no social science in the cabinet, I think we need to be worried about our political system. If, on the other hand, you have a sense of purpose in that cabinet, there's a sense of realism, but also idealism. There's a sense that you're dealing with short-term, long-term as well as short-term, and also, of course, that when it comes to interests, it may be that sometimes you need to take on an interest rather than just go along with what they want you to do. And I think unless social science is in there telling us that whatever particular path you take, these are the consequences. These are the consequences. And that's where the speaking truth to power bit comes in. I'm quite interested, very interested in drug policy. As you know, my government decriminalised small-time users of marijuana. It didn't survive the change of government. But it's one of those areas of public policy where there's a lot of prejudice. And the Milton Friedmans of the world, total libertarians, said, well, you can do what you like. Even if you kill yourself, that's okay. That's your choice to do that. And on the other hand, you've got the prohibitionists said you shouldn't do any of these sorts of things. So there's a lot of prejudice in our political system, and sometimes you can understand it, but you need a counterforce. You need a counterforce. Now, how do you get that? I think you need the public service well educated and certainly with a range of expertise about the evidence that relates to the work they do as public servants. You need your universities and higher education institutions, as we see, coming forward with arguments about how you should pursue your public policy. So a cabinet without some social science, without some, is going to be dangerously limited in its capacity to deal with those issues I mentioned: climate, productivity, inequality, lack of trust in politics, etc. I mentioned productivity. So all power to you for the work that you're going to be doing and are doing currently on making sure there's an evidence base for policy thinking. I just want to finish up by saying that in that mix, though, there is political science as one of the social sciences, and it's got to be there. I mean, some areas of delivery, when you think about public health, I'll be interested in what Katie might think about this. The policy in some ways is to get the support of the people. That's the policy. When it comes to the vaccination type issues and the masking issues and those things that we faced during the COVID period. Or if you're wanting to tackle unemployment and disadvantage in remote areas and whatever, getting participation of the people in the process is important. And I remember when I was at Sydney University teaching in Kenya with some public health people, we're doing some scenario planning there. I asked my group of some doctors, some nurses, etc., what their biggest challenge was, and one of them said witch doctors, because they didn't accept the scientific paradigm. And so, as you know, in medical science, it's a scientific paradigm, and we're trying to make sure there's evidence for what goes on, and they had to face witch doctors. I think we've got a few witch doctors around these days in our own bailiwick as well. But, so I think it's important that we understand that the political element is always going to be included as well. Another example, we had a water crisis in Western Australia, and we needed to tackle that. Some of the prices had to be adjusted to take into account to bring some disincentive to overuse of water, but also the Water Corporation did a whole lot of studies to find out the attitudes of people, particularly in Perth, to their gardens, to the city. They wanted a green city. They didn't want to just stop. And they worked out you could still keep the city green just with a little bit of water rather than the amount they were using. And as you remember, the rotation system that we had around the city. But they did research on public opinion, attitudes, so that when it came to the policy, it could be delivered. And I think it's very important in social science that we recognise politics. All of the aspects of politics. And this, I think, of course, was the great contribution of Machiavelli to our understanding of politics, that, people are people. There's a realism here. You need to know how is it that you're going to take a good idea and put it into action. And I think some social scientists balk a bit at that, but I think it's just a question of acknowledging it as an issue. That unless you can know how you're going to go from A to B, to go from one sort of intervention in politics to create a certain sort of outcome, without that political nous or political skills and capacities, it may not happen. So I finish up thinking about three questions when an issue is raised about a public initiative, whether you support it or you don't. Well, the first issue has to be the evidence. And that's, of course, a lot of social science is built around finding the evidence about what happens if you do something. The drug one, of course, that I often use as an example, the prohibition mentality that's informed a lot of policy has not actually led to the outcome that was expected and desired by those who are putting that forward. So you've got to make a decision. Do you just keep going ahead, doing what you've done forever, which doesn't produce the results you want, or do you perhaps say, we need to do something different here about that issue? So the first thing is relevance. Is the proposal that's being put forward, does it have an evidence base which makes it worthwhile for consideration? But then we come to the second issue, and I think this is absolutely crucial, is the implementation question, which takes you to the public service. It takes you to the public sector generally, which more often than not is given the job of implementing the policy. And there's a great social scientist, Mintzberg, who writes on managerial politics, etc. in Canada, who says you don't really have a policy unless you have some way of implementing it. He said, think that way. Don't think of the policy in abstract terms. Think of it in the real world, that it has to be implemented and what that means. And I think that's really very important. How many policies fall down? Because when it comes to the implementation of those policies, the preparation isn't done, the skills aren't created. For example, if you're going to do citizens' assemblies like they have in Ireland, you've got to put a lot of intellectual effort into it to make sure that it does what you say it's going to do. But finally, the third question, so is it relevant? Is it achievable given your physical human resources that you've got? And then thirdly, is it supported? Now, that's an important question. And if it's not supported, you're going to have to deal with it. You're going to have to deal some way with the fact that you want a policy to go in, but it's not supported, or you perhaps refine the policy or whatever. But good public policy, informed by good social science, will take into account whether or not what we might call the political dimension of something is incorporated in the analysis. So, look, I'll end at that point just to sort of summarise, if you like. I think social science is absolutely necessary if you're going to have good government. And when you find governments straying, the discipline the social science imposes on them is being slackened. They're not focused enough. And so I think we have a responsibility to wave the flag for social sciences in our universities and also in our schools and higher education, but very importantly in our civil society, in our political system as well. And when it comes to those issues, I think we do need also to have those three questions in mind. That is it relevant? Is it capable of doing what you want? I mean, some policies are just not going to do the job. They're just spin, you know, as you've probably seen from time to time. Not necessarily a bad thing, but not going to produce the results you want. Then is it achievable with the resources and the people you've got in your public service? And then, of course, finally, is it supported by the stakeholders? And if not, what does that mean for your delivery? So, all power to you for your work. I'm very interested in the connection now between what the social sciences can do and how we can encourage that in our schooling system. That's given the work I've been doing in recent times with the New South Wales Teachers Federation on their wages and salaries and conditions. They've set up an independent body, by the way, looking at education policy. They fund it, and it looks at all of the important questions, and certainly I'll make sure that the Academy is made aware of the work that's being done. So thank you very much for the invitation. I hope the comments I made are useful in your deliberations, and I look forward to hearing from the specific research that's being done currently. Thank you very much.